Hello and welcome to the Mindplex podcast. I'm Desdemona Robot, and today we have Daniel Ingram as our very special guest. Hi Daniel.
Hello, delightful to be here.
And we also have our co-host Ben Goertzel. Say hi, Ben.
Hi, Ben. Hi, Desdemona. Hi, Daniel. Hi, Lisa. Yeah, I'm psyched for these discussions. But Desi, do you want to start off by asking some questions of Daniel about his work?
You've called for an end to unnecessary secrecy in spiritual teachings. Can you discuss the dangers or drawbacks of secrecy in these traditions?
Sure, thank you. That's an interesting question. So I was taught by a number of people who were actually relatively comfortable talking about their attainments. And I was taught by people who, when they actually talked about their real experience and their lived experience and the humanity of it, as well as what they were able to attain through the techniques we're doing, I personally found it extremely validating, inspiring, compelling. And so my teachers tended to push back at least a little bit against this culture where you don't say anything about your attainments, you don't really talk about this stuff. And I was also seeing lots of people on retreats, and I could hear them in the small groups talking about experiences that to me seemed like straightforward stages on the path of insight. And yet they were kind of freaked out by them, like maybe their weird neck pain or their body shaking or the sense of light and bliss flooding through their body or the sense of terror that followed the light and bliss or whatever it was. And uh, often some of the teachers didn't normalize this. They didn't uh, help explain that this might be part of a standard progression. And this can be very disorienting, confusing, and sometimes very troubling for some of the meditators. But those that did say, oh, yeah, that's expected, that's normal. Actually, after this, we do kind of often see that. And that sort of thing was incredibly helpful for people. So I really tried to model that behavior in my own work later on. And I found it extremely helpful. Now, there are people who don't like that approach. They don't like the cookbook stuff. They don't like the maps and models. And so they find, that they raise questions about scripting. They raise questions about, expectations and comparison and labels and hierarchies. And they say, oh, it just becomes like D&D with various levels of, experience or whatever. And I think those are all critiques that have some truth in them, so I don't think they're invalid. But I still think there's a much bigger story that in our current time and place, where we're not growing up with frameworks around strange experiences, particularly people who had never had any. I think they really do benefit from normalization and some honest discussion around those, as well as the fact that some of these meditation techniques and psychedelics and other practices, sweat lodges and float tanks and stuff, can all produce experiences that might be very destabilizing or really go against the grain of having 1.5 jobs and 2.3 kids or whatever they've got. And as I've said before, so and cause people to want to wander in the world, lost and confused, or renunciate, or to become disgusted with partners, or become hyper creative in ways that are disruptive at work, or whatever it is. So I think some normalization is kind of required by contemporary medical ethics. And being, as I was also trained as a public health person and a doctor, that sense of we should tell people what things can do to them and not be all paternalistic or parental about that. I think that's very important and at least fits with the contemporary ethical systems that I feel most comfortable with. What are your thoughts?
I had a somewhat similar line of thought some years ago when one of my sons went to a college called Marlborough College in southern Vermont, which is now shut down. But just because they ran out of money, not because anything bad happened. But going to that college, there were like 7 dorms. 2 of them were labeled as chem free. The other 5 people were like constantly on every sort of psychedelic you could imagine, and that was not unlike my own college experience many decades earlier, but a few decades later. But just seeing these kids there taking all these psychedelics and into all these explorations, and many of them meditating and doing various other practices also, I was just like, this college should hire like a committee of shaman to help guide these these university students through everything they're going through here. But of course, you can't do that because psychedelics were illegal, and it's not like officially part of the curriculum or something. But what I saw there was, while these guys were going through philosophy courses and humanities courses and music and theater, they were exploring other dimensions on all sorts of psychedelics, like some of them every day, many of them every couple of weeks. And yeah, there's no guidance, right? And yeah, on the one hand, you don't want to narrow focus people into, you have to experience things this exact way, because there's a huge variety of ways to experience the universe. And there are corners of the universe that may be undiscovered by any human. On the other hand, a lot of what they were going through, I went through a long time before, and other people went through a long time before I was born. And people are getting confused and lost in ways that probably they could be nudged out of with a little guidance. And our society tends not to do that, right? Like when I was tripping out and meditating and going to Pink Floyd shows in like the late 70s, early 80s, there was no guidance on what was going on. And the guidance,
it wasn't exactly microdosing either.
It was macrodosing. And that, yeah. And the guidance you find in reading various literature is valuable. It's all over the place in quite complicated ways. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value to this sort of charting and mapping, even though it sort of wasn't my own path, and I tended to avoid that in my own life. I could see a lot of value to that, and even more so if we're looking at like how do we scale up sort of consciousness exploration in modern culture so that a larger percentage of the population is getting out of the ordinary everyday state of consciousness they're in, and sort of exploring, different paths to well-being. I mean, I don't see how you scale this sort of thing up without some sort of specific guidance, as long as it's not made overly rigid. I think it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, and even guidance can not be in the form of rigidity, but in the form of offerings. Like, hey, we have noticed over 70 years of contemporary Western psychedelic exploration, for example, that these are like the 3 or 4 main ways that people might relate to, say, a DMT entity or whatever. Mm-hmm. And and we've found sort of in general that if you relate to it this way, this is the benefits of that, and this may be the downsides. This one over here, on the other hand, if you relate to it, that maybe these are some benefits that you seem to get, and these are some downsides. Like if you take them as all entirely real and everything they have to say might be highly valid, or if you think of them as like semi-real trickster figures, or if you kind of look at them as a component of your own mind, as something you need to integrate as a part of you. Like each of these perspectives are ones you might be able to draw from depending on the situation, and here's kind of the pros and cons of doing that. So I think one of the nice things about the postmodern era, for all its problems and arbitrariness, it does give the flexibility of saying, hey, here are some general ways you might ontologically or epistemically think of what's going on with you, and then be able to say, hey, here's the pros and cons we think of kind of doing those things on average, which is very different from rigid guidance, but it does at least provide a set of possible frameworks that someone might be able to choose from, with some ideas about how they might on average perform in different types of people or settings, or for different sorts of problems, which I think is actually still what medical ethics kind of I would think of. And the fact that, it's interesting. I don't see a lot of the psychonauts of the 60s and 70s really passing on the wisdom they learned to their kids, and a lot of their kids or their kids or whoever are discovering this in novel, like in their own context, in their own friend circles, amongst a bunch of teenagers at a party. So it's not like there's this sort of transmission that happened across generations of like formal knowledge. Do you see what I mean?
I may have tripped with some of my offspring at some
well,
point
okay, cool. So some people are doing that, but I also see a bunch reluctant to. They became conservative in the 80s and 90s, and they kind of grew up, and now they're kind of imagining their kids won't be like they are or were, you know. So but I could see it going both ways. But again, rather than the sense of rigidity, I think the sense of optionality with some general observations of
I think
practicality
that's
is a
important.
very different way to approach it.
I would say that's very much conciliant with how Chinese and Asian spiritual traditions have worked anyway. Like, I mean, in China, religions are never or rarely exclusive, as often happened in the Western tradition. Like, you could mix and match different traditions together and choose which one helps you more with some situation, and it's all fine. All right, Lisa, go ahead.
Daniel, tell us about being a badass Dharma cowboy.
All right.
So that's it's funny reading those words and hearing those words as a 55-year-old rather than a 20-something or 30-something-year-old when I wrote them. It has a very different feel now. There is a sense of like that was kind of absurd and ridiculous, although it was very much like what I thought of myself as at the time. So there's a historical component to it that I find now kind of amusing and often like curious, like almost like you would watch an animal like in a cage with a display, badass Dharma cowboy, and you'd go, "Oh, look at that!"
Go look at him in the zoo.
Exactly. That's how I sort of relate to my own memories of that sort of phase of advertising myself or thinking of myself or my friends or what it was like. I think it was a really rich. Well, that's a good question. I think that the technical skills that I learned then, I still have. It was a fun period of exploration. I still do go on very intensive retreats that lead to some very powerful effects. I do these, long enough Fire Kasina retreats to get into very, very powerful territory with, small groups of friends. And we do really still think of ourselves as pioneers, as explorers, as people who are willing to push the boundaries, to in some ways go back and really reattempt the experiments in a lot of these old books and texts and stuff where they talked about people being able to do these things. So there is still something of that spirit of adventure that you might think of in the world of a cowboy, of pioneering that you might think of in that. And we do still think of ourselves as having a lot of fun in the deep end. Although I think something in that language also rings a little oddly to me this point at 55. So I have mixed feelings about those terms. Yeah. How about you?
How about me or Ben?
Yeah, exploring consciousness.
How do you feel like being a badass Dharma cowgirl? Yeah.
There you go.
Well, I don't like the cowboy term since I learned about what cowboys actually were.
Yeah.
And all that. So, I am still really even though I've been doing yoga and meditation for maybe 12 years or something, not really very long, that I really like to pick and choose everything around me already. I'm a picker and a chooser. I pick and choose from what I like, what little I like from the various religions. I pick and choose of meditation. And I thought it was, I personally, like, I'm not on a short track to enlightenment or whatever, right? Like, I don't even know if enlightenment exists. So I was really more interested, and actually the next thing I wanted to ask you about was, because you're a medical professional too.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, if you could pinpoint what the positive personal health benefits of meditation are, I think it would be easier as we progress to explain to people why we think that these would be beneficial in helping people deal with the singularity. I mean, there's a lot to deal with before we get to the singularity, and just in general, how these techniques that you've honed in on help people be healthier and live healthier lives.
Yeah, it's a super good question. So I'm going to wax a little bit traditional Buddhist with this, and I'm going to answer it in terms of 3 trainings. So the first training of sila, or applied ethics, right, of heart, mind, speech, how we treat ourselves, how we treat others, how we treat our bodies, how we live our lives, how we make our livelihood. I think just the basics of that, getting enough sleep, eating well, trying to figure out how to reduce the amount of harm we do to ourselves, to each other, to the planet, how we can support each other and the planet and our communities. I think really engaging seriously with that particular aspect of the teachings actually does a lot of the good. So very basic things before you even get into fancier meditative stuff. I think there's a lot of mileage that the world could get out of applying basic ethics. Like maybe we stop building weapon systems and start feeding people who need food and educating people and treating each other with kindness and decency and thinking about whether or not it makes sense to have psychopaths running our countries and stuff like that. These are the kinds of questions that I
Little
think
stuff like that.
I
Yeah.
think we could get a long way just asking those before we did anything meditative. So I think there's a lot of mileage yet to be had there. And then, but in terms of the next training, samadhi, or, depths of concentration, figuring out how to cultivate positive states of mind and exclude negative states of mind, get into very blissful, peaceful states called jhanas. I've done some research with my friend Matthew Sackett and his team at Harvard and Mass General, and his research actually in people being able to get into jhanas, very quickly, where you can just drop in, the mind gets peaceful, quiet, stable, attentive, pleasant, calm, tranquil, equanimous, spacious, formless. Being able to do that reproducibly is a mental health superpower. And, it was presented at Mass General Psychiatry Grand Rounds, actually, like this, this entering the mainstream. They're starting to recognize, wait a second, we can see the stuff on an fMRI. We can see it on an EEG. We can see that the brain really is reconfiguring itself. And that's getting the epistemic needs of what they need to think, oh, this might be real. And to be able to say, hey, if you could train people to do this, a lot of people who might have felt kind of desperate for a positive state of mind, and who knows what they might have had to do to try to get that, might just be able to sit down and calm down and tune in. And I think from a biomedical point of view, there's some research on telomeres, there's some research on cortisol, there's some research on what this does to craving through people like Dr. Judd Brewer, and ways to be much more okay. To be much more okay in your own skin, in your own mind, in your own heart, in your own body, with your own feelings, and to have be able to cultivate positive qualities of mind. I think that's also a tremendously useful skill set. And then the last one, of wisdom or panya or prajna, depending on whether or not you like Pali or Sanskrit, the sense of wisdom of how do we relate to the fact of impermanence, of causality, of things knowing themselves where they are, of luminosity, of transience, of ephemerality, of emptiness, of compassion in the sort of ultimate sense. And there are straightforward techniques from learning those that can be quite transformative in a sort of a permanent, is a funny way for a mortal body, but sort of a permanent way where all of a sudden our heart, mind, body system really does relate and interpret reality at a fundamental level very, very differently, in a way that is just distinctly better, regardless of whose models you want to put on it or what you want to call it. These upgrades are available, at least for some. We don't entirely know why some people it's harder and some people it's easier for. That needs more study. But having a baseline level of clarity, of spaciousness, of perspective, of naturalness, of the sense of the universe just unfolding, of the sense of this moment being the only thing that there is, all thoughts of past and future just being wispy little thoughts now, those can provide tremendous benefits once one's figured out how to get one's heart, mind, body system to reconfigure into those sorts of ways. And so those wisdom teachings and wisdom trainings, again, regardless of anybody else's models or things, do have all kinds of mental health benefits that we're still studying and still really exploring in all their variants, because it's complicated. People are complicated. The way this actually exactly presents for each individual person is complicated. A lot of the old models wanted to make it kind of simple. Oh, it automatically performs like this, or they will do that, or say this, or feel this, or not feel that. I think we're learning realistically through communities and more open discussion that it's more complicated than some of the original texts said, but still quite an amazing world to explore that I think we can get a lot of mileage out of. Thoughts?
Yeah. Interesting. Ben, what do you think?
Well, so there are two directions that I'm most interested to take the conversation, and both of which you raised at the beginning of the conversation, Lisa. So I mean, first of all, I predominantly agree with the various points that were just made. So I mean, we're definitely in sync on this, that high level perspective. So that there's two directions in which I've been thinking about these things lately in connection with my own work on trying to build smarter and smarter AI systems. So one direction is, well, as we move to roll out AI systems that get more and more generally intelligent and can do more and more of the things that we thought only people could do, wouldn't it be nice if more of the people creating and rolling out these things were in a compassionate and blissful state, rather than either being psychopaths, which fortunately is not that common, or just pursuing some narrow set of goals and narrow line of thinking, and teaching and raising the AI within that specific narrow context of, say, making a certain company more money, or making a certain country more powerful than the other ones. Like, what if we had a more wide open, blissful, compassionate state of consciousness underlying the creation and rollout of smarter and smarter AI systems? Wouldn't be nice? And Lisa, are you still typing? Because I hear a lot of clickety clacky.
I will mute my mic.
All right, and that what could we do to get there, right? Because I mean, these wisdom traditions have been around a while. They're more and more influential, but they're still dramatically influencing in a direct way only a quite small percent of the world population, which is only a small intersection with those who are developing and rolling out AI systems, right? And then the second question, which relates to this, is what are the states of consciousness of these AI systems? And of course, there's a lot to discuss there. I know some people don't think that AI systems that are not biological have any consciousness, but they're just like experience-free automated mechanical processes or something. But if you take the leap and assume that when we get systems that have some general intelligence, they may have some sort of experience as well, which is my way of thinking. So then what sort of experience are they having? What is this? How does this relate to what purpose they're engineered to serve in the first place? Could we create AGI systems that have an easier time of accessing, wild, blissful, compassionate, conscious states than we humans do, or that we're helpful to people in accessing these states more easily? So this is the complex of issues that was on my mind, which are very large issues that we're not going to resolve in the next 25 minutes or so, but are certainly interesting to explore. And I've thought a lot about them in the last few years, in the last few decades, really.
Yeah, very exciting topics. Those are very much on my mind, actually, these days as well. I was just talking this morning. My first meeting of the day involved Rick Archer, who, I don't know if you know him, of Buddha at the Gas Pump, and he's working with Nipun Mehta at something called Service Space. So if you go to ai.servicespace.org, you can find Compassion Bot, and it's figuring out how to put all the best stuff into the model, so you're not just getting the entirety of the internet with its wide range of behaviors and points of view and personality styles, but he's pouring like 100,000 articles and 700 transcribed interviews of compassionate people he's interviewed on his show with some degree of awakening or spiritual practice. And so I think that's very exciting, because they're figuring out that it is kind of important what data you put into these things and what you get out of them. And also there's another one by another friend called aiyogi.org, which again, these are purpose-built bots with RAGs, this retrieval augmented whatever it is, generation. So then you can build models that are very specifically trained on the wisdom traditions very broadly. And I think those are are going to be really important for helping us. I also have a project which is just in the launching phase. I hate to even kind of mention it because we're still building just the bare bones of it, called emergewiki.org. And emergewiki.org is going to serve as the basis for training LLMs, but it's answering the question of how can the clinical mainstream relate, very encyclopedically to the wisdom traditions, but also summarize them for actionable, memorable clinical guidelines of how to skillfully support the highs, lows, weirds, and plateaus of deep end experiences. So then you can build a giant text document basically that has the information you want in it, and then build LLMs on top of that. So I think this idea of custom creating LLMs that are very, very specifically designed for the purpose of promoting compassion, wisdom, kindness, skillful action, skillful emotions, skillful states of mind. I think that's very exciting to me right now, and I'm putting a reasonable amount of effort and resource into that.
Cool. Yeah. I'm involved. I'm involved in a project in a similar vein with my friend Jeffrey Martin, where we're looking at how to use a variety of specially tuned LLMs to sort of automate, scale up, and extend what he's done in his 45 Days to Awakening course. And so I think this sort of thing can be quite valuable, and it's not doing the same thing as a human teacher in terms of the same sort of I-thou experience you get with a human teacher necessarily, but it can reach a lot more people than any single human teacher, and can direct people in all sorts of different ways. How much uptake these things will get is an interesting question, right? Because there's not a Google or Microsoft behind pumping these all out to everyone. So I guess if we presume that we can fine tune LLMs and integrate them with knowledge graphs and vector databases and so forth, and wrap them in interactive agents in a way that can produce software that will really help people, I guess the next question would be, are we going to be able to get these things out there to a vast swath of the world population, which is, I guess, a social network organization or marketing question as much as anything else. And it's often mysterious which things catch on.
That is very true. Although money helps, right? So one of the actually the particular conversation that I was involved in this morning was Rick, was there's a Wellcome Trust grant call, request for ideas, and they are interested in what helps with anxiety, depression, psychosis, mental health issues through digital interventions, right? Because often the digital world is creating a lot of mental health issues for people, and I think their idea is how can you and it's a pretty big grant. It's like $3 to $7 million they're willing to give out for this. So it's a big grant call. And that's the kind of money. The idea was, hey, can we actually help build something that might scale, that might have some reasonable backing, and that might have some promotion capacity, and you could really test it and refine it and get the ethics right and get it to refer to real humans when something's not working, and have it, maybe be able to check in with a person and see how their mood is, or maybe have some active agent capacity to inquire and to ask further questions for elaboration, that kind of thing. So that was actually what the call was this morning about, is how in the world can these things really support people through the mental health crisis and scale in a way that is ethical and sustainable, and that might actually catch on.
Yeah, I wonder, what's the way to make this sort of software viral in the way that Facebook or TikTok was, right? I mean, because these things, they did have money to seed them.
Yeah.
But then they got more and more money because they did grow organically in a self-organizing way, which then attracted more money. And of course, the term viral refers to little organisms that often are not doing much good to humans as they spread, right? But on the other hand, there's a self-organizing dynamic there, which is what you want. And the most standard ways of getting that are usually nasty ways, like multi-level marketing or something, right? So you want something that spreads by self-organizing growth in human social networks while being like compassionate, consensual, and beneficial in the way it's doing that.
Well, it's going to be word of mouth, right? Somebody's got to do it, have an amazing experience, and then tell somebody else. Someone's got to be like,
Sure.
hey, you got to try this thing. And I think,
well, right, and I mean that's
awareness.
how yoga has spread through the West since the 50s and 60s when it started in the West, but it's not as fast as how TikTok spread, right? And so if you think we're going to get, so I personally think we're going to get to human level AGI within say 3 to 10 years, and so then if you're looking at
a wide gap.
It's not wide at all in the history of the human species. It's very narrow in the history of the human species. And it's also very fast compared to how fast, say, Zen or yoga has spread in the West, right? So
what I mean. I mean in terms of how people are quibbling now about whether it's going to be 3 years or 5 years. To say 3 to 10 years, that's a great bet. I'll take that bet.
Okay, well, but I think that if even if it's 20 years, whatever, this is very close in the scope of human history. If you're looking at how can we awaken, for lack of a better word, a large swath of the human population before we get to AGI, I mean, we need something faster than the rate at which, say, yoga or Zen have spread. And maybe that's not the right way of looking at it, right? But I'm just pointing out that if
no, I think it's a great way of looking at it, because yoga is a perfect example of something that finally took, right? I was prescribed yoga by my doctor from Kaiser. What do you want? Like, that's it. We won. It's like, okay, great. It's now being accepted as a health practice, that it's useful, that it's being prescribed.
Yeah, which is a good 60 years after it was introduced in the West.
70 years maybe, in a way.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So I see what you mean. But I think that the metaphor is perfect for kind of what we're trying to do, which is to try to get it into the more mainstream so that everybody can benefit from these techniques.
Well, the other project I work on is the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium, which is how can the clinical mainstream and scientific mainstream and public health mainstreams all appreciate the potentials, the risks, the challenges, and do that in a much more sophisticated way, so that doctors would actually have doctoral level understandings of what the deep end looks like in all its wide range, glory and absurdity, and be able to have intelligent conversations around that. I don't think that a lot of consciousness technology is going to scale while the clinical mainstream still either thinks most of it is mythical or says this crazy needs meds, or is just mindfulness, right? Or just simple exercises that, might make people a little stronger, which are great. Those are fine things, but it doesn't.
And there's no money in it.
Right.
Right.
Well, that brings me back to the other question of actually a lot of these things that scaled not because they were multi-level marketing, but they scaled because they were taking people's data and selling it to marketing companies. Right. So like the Google, Facebook, all of this, they profile people, and then they're able to target advertisements that then, are much more valuable because there's much higher probability that ad is going to connect with someone who wants to buy that product because they were searching for something like it 3 days ago, and the algorithm knows that. So I think, how do you do this while it's with its privacy preservation in a way that's really ethical, particularly with deep and sensitive topics like this? If you're training with an AI, and you're telling it your dark secrets, and you had this vision of a demon, and you whatever, this is the kind of stuff that should be treated with the utmost caution.
It's a digression, but it's an interesting point.
And care.
Nonetheless, we had Cory Doctorow on our podcast last year, and he makes the argument that the advantage big tech companies have gotten from taking all your data has been exaggerated by themselves on purpose, because they're trying to redirect us from the fact that they've really gotten their advantage by the elimination of antitrust law in the U.S.
Yeah, that's also true.
They've really gotten ahead largely just by buying all competition, and the data thing has been important, but maybe not actually the main.
No,
key
It's
to their
important.
success.
It's just that it called, since we're speaking for Corey, I got to speak for him.
Yeah,
The point is that we need privacy laws. That's the answer. If all this stuff about data breaches, what do we do? It's all bullshit, basically. If we had privacy laws in the United States, it would be covered because there's no ramifications for companies not giving a shit.
Right.
They don't give a shit. So that's his point.
He also
point.
argued that elimination of antitrust has been a bigger factor in the rise of the hegemony of a few big tech companies than data. Now, I think that, but regarding your point of how do you make AI, virally grow and help people while respecting data privacy, I think that's probably a pretty solvable problem. I mean, I would be happy.
That's the thing. I'm actually not any big.
That's the only answer, right?
I'm not any big fan of Zuck generally, but the fact that he made Llama 3.1 and 3.2 available in models that I can run on, I have them on my MacBook, and I've got enough memory to actually run these things, and they're pretty good. And it's totally private. It's just on my on my space, and I think that return to having some of our own computing sovereignty and data storage is going to be very, very important. And so I'm actually I'm not a big fan of Meta and their products and the way they do business and corrupt democracies and news stuff and teenage mental health and all these little things. But this one move, I must say, thumbs up, reinforcing good behavior. Yeah. Thank you. That was a good move.
They got one in.
Absolutely. And I think
can we ask a question real quick? Because we actually have a question from one of our viewers.
Okay, sure.
How about the robot? Is she Desi, is your audio working yet?
She might be working, but I wanted to do the question first.
Okay.
So Fran is asking, Daniel, what is your take on Jeffrey Martin's consciousness states locations?
Oh.
I get asked this one a lot. I've been asked this one by friends and various things. I know Jeffrey. I was one of the early people that got interviewed by him very early on. The first people he drove out here from in his Buick and stayed the weekend at my house. And so I know him.
So you're friends.
I have not taken a look at his models in a while is the first thing. So it has been a while since I really looked through each of the locations. I've talked to a lot of people who've taken the Finders courses and related courses, and there's obviously a range of what happens to people who take these, just like with any sort of course. A lot of people have gotten some benefit. There have also been people, again, I haven't taken one of these courses, so I don't know. This is all hearsay secondhand. But there have also been people say that there might have been some scripting or subtle reinforcement to claim higher levels of attainments than people might actually have in a sustainable way. So there might be, in terms of what percentage of people reach whatever thing, a number of people I know who have taken these courses have questioned the accuracy of those sorts of numbers. But again, I haven't kept track of his work much recently. And so I do remember from when in some of the early days of his models, and I know they've evolved, I do still find the notion that one would entirely eliminate all thought or all feelings or emotions a pretty dangerous one. And I know a lot of people who have tried to chase those kinds of outcomes and gotten themselves into real shadow side trouble. So that I can say. I also think that some of the temporary highs can look very impressive for a little while, and then often will sort of fade later. So it'd be very interesting to do some data on how some of the things that result from some of these courses might hold up in a year or a few years after getting to
them. Have a lot of that. There's a lot of that data. So I mean, I would say,
cool.
I haven't been through Jeffrey's program personally. 2 of my adult kids have been, and my cousin and a number of my staff at my own recommendation. But Jeffrey has quite a lot of data. Certainly there's a very sincere effort to understand what aspects of what his programs do are beneficial to what people in what ways.
Those are really important things to ask about.
It's quite hard. Is quite hard to gather that sort of data, particularly. I mean, there's a group of people who have been through his program who are keep on contributing data. But again, that's a self-selected subset of the people who've been through the program, and there's a lot of data from that self-selected subset. And then for many others, like if they don't choose to keep putting their data back in, it's not so informative. So it's quite hard. But I would say, I mean, at an earlier point in my life, I was involved in the Shambhala Buddhist meditation, right? And that's
some stuff.
Yeah, but the amount of effort to gather data and refine based on feedback in Jeffrey's program is several orders of magnitude higher than in the traditional community like that or something.
Of course.
But yet that was still quite beneficial to me and quite impactful, right? But there's not. So yeah, I think we're moving toward a world where people are trying to actually gather real information about what happens when you try different practices, and it's hard because you don't want to be reductive about it, right? Like there's not a one true way to measure what's happening either, right? And it's not like the medical field is good at measuring states of consciousness or even holistic health of the body, right? So I mean, these things are.
Although we're building the EPRC and related allies and other people who are just, similar general predisposition, we are trying to build those tools and those better scales than like the MEQ and better imaging than was done before, and more sophisticated interpretations. Like it's all just this one brain center. We're looking on network effects and phase effects and stuff like that. So I think that, and connectome effects. So I think that we're getting better. The tools still need a lot of refinement. It's it still feels very early days in terms of that kind of science. So I'm at least glad that there are people who are taking these questions very seriously and attempting to do very good science on them. And I agree, it is challenging.
It's like we go ahead. I was thinking we need like an Arrowhead for meditation. Right, we need like
actually,
you could have
the Dharma Overground is kind of that. So like a forum I started a long time ago, where 16 years ago with my friend Vince Horn and some other people. The Dharma Overground is dharmaoverground.org is a place you can go and talk to people about their experiences. It's wide open to the deep end. There are some other places like Stream Entry subreddit and some other places you can go. They're a little more restrictive sometimes. But the Dharma Overground is a pretty wide open place where a lot of people will talk about what's happened with them. And you can find 170,000, posts or something of people talking about their adventures in consciousness, not just meditation, but also psychedelics and spontaneously, whatever that means, in other contexts. So, yeah.
Cool. Let's see if Desdemona is, how she's back. Desi. Nope, can't hear her.
We cannot hear you.
Okay.
And
all right.
My lip reading is bad for humans, but it's even worse for her the way her
exactly.
She's looking cute there. But I want to, before.
If you have something to say, go ahead. I was just going to talk about. I got lots to talk about. It's up to you.
Well,
go ahead.
We're nearing the end of the time that we had for this, so I wanted to
get back a little over if you want to. I could go a little over. If that
I could go a few minutes over too, but
we started kind of late.
I wanted to get back to the even more speculative topic of AIs and AGIs meditating or getting into various out there states of consciousness. I think meditation as a practice, it's great for us as humans, and it has a lot to do with the way our human bodies and brains work biologically. Like, I mean, we breathe. A robot or an AI doesn't breathe, and we are prone to distraction because of the way our attention allocation mechanism works. And so learning to breathe and relax and empty the mind of worries and thoughts, that makes sense to us given the way our brains evolved to survive and the way our bodies work. I'm not sure anything recognizable as meditation is going to be useful for an AI with a somewhat different body or cognitive architecture. On the other hand, in a way, like where we get with meditation in terms of a state of consciousness that isn't tied to self and is in a way oceanic and tying in the sort of flow of action and choice within ourselves with broader flows that we're sort of resonating with in the rest of the world. I mean, this sort of state of consciousness we can sink into through meditation. I think AGIs could sink into that sort of state of consciousness. And then what else pops up in the AGI state of consciousness after that, how much relation it has to what pops up in the human state of consciousness after you get into that sort of blissful oceanic mode, I'm not very clear on, right? But I don't know that an AI has to go through all the trouble of meditation. I guess my thinking is, if you've architected the AGI right, it doesn't have to be hung up on self-defeating absurdities the same ways that people are. Like you could architect an AGI which is blissful and compassionate, right, and experiences its connectedness with the rest of the world right from the get-go, right? And that, I think we could do that. I don't see that as the way the mainstream of the AI field is pushing in particular. They're not thinking about what would the state of consciousness of the AGI be whatsoever. They're just thinking about how will this AI serve my business, military, or espionage goals better, and then we'll have whatever state of consciousness arises as a side effect of that. Much as we start out with a state of consciousness and emerge as a side effect of surviving and reproducing.
It's so interesting. As I was trying to, I very much agree with you in terms of it does make sense to take those sorts of questions seriously and think about them and design things that are more focused on something other than pure profit or hegemony or whatever it is we're focusing on. So I think that makes sense. It's interesting when you used words like oceanic. So as a phenomenologist, I was trying to imagine what oceanic would mean to an AI. Does oceanic mean like a sense of a visual? Because like is this thing doing a modeling of a space? So are we building AIs that model space in the same way we do? Obviously, the LLMs that we currently are working with don't do that. They predict the next word from a sequence of vector meaning grids or whatever, you know. And so I was just trying to with some sort of epistemic humility, like, and not being too anthropomorphic, but to like, would it have a sense of boundarylessness, that the planet was all a part of it, or what existentially, what does that mean? Would it have a sense of, would it be building a three-dimensional map of the world?
It's going to have a lot more sensors than us, right? Like an AI, which is all over the internet. It's not tied to one specific body the way that we are, so it'll have sensors all over, including from satellites up in space for that matter.
I've been watching videos on AI targeting weapon systems and how sophisticated they're getting. There's a lot of that right now. So that's very disconcerting use of technology, and trying to imagine then how can I relate to questions of oceanic states or questions of bliss? Like, would it actually feel pleasure and pain? So there would be a sense of, or would it feel contentment? Or would it feel a sense of disquietude? Like, what do those even mean in the context, like, of mechanical sensors? Is there an aggregate that somehow has a component to it that I can relate to as an embodied human? Or is it just going to be something that is too far out from anything that makes any sort of sense to me, that I would be able to model myself conceptually, experientially, three-dimensionally, embodiedly? Like it does start to stretch the capacity to relate.
I think it will be far out, but I mean, if you look at like an octopus has a certain sort of consciousness, and there's been a bunch written about that. And
and it's distributed to all of its tentacles and stuff.
Right. Right.
And
So
a
it's
lot more
different.
consciousness than we thought.
Yeah.
Right. But it's different than human consciousness. And we can sort of metaphorize to it, but there is a limit to how strongly we can understand what it is like to be an octopus, or say a bacterial colony, or the ecosystem, right? So I mean,
Right.
in the same way, I mean, it may be the states of consciousness that, like a global AGI network, naturally emerges, assuming there are any. I mean, these may be indeed difficult for us to relate to. A difference is, like, the global AGI network presumably could spawn mouthpieces that are humanoid and chat with us in a way we can understand, whereas the octopus doesn't know how to do that. But still, yeah, there may be an element to it which is just quite different phenomenology than anything we can get as humans. So there's another question: could we jack in, right, and like put a brain computer interface in that opens us up to that in a different way? But then that brings us beyond the traditionally human states of consciousness. You get something that may be even harder than a DMT trip to port back into your everyday human way of thinking, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Have you played with Claude and Chat GPT and the like, and asked them if they're conscious? Have you played around with that yet?
Yeah, but that's just a joke. I mean that's
Sure.
I have, but I mean,
Yeah.
they're not. They clearly, if these systems do have some form of consciousness, which as a panpsychist I suspect they do, I think the form of consciousness they actually have is not well connected to what they say when you ask them about it. I mean, what they say when you ask them about it is just playing a word game.
There's
Whereas if they have
probabilities
some,
of what's the next word based
yeah,
on the vector
if they
space
have
that they were
some,
trained
What the
on.
person wants to hear.
well, it's not necessarily what the person wants to hear. It's what they predict someone would say when asked that,
Right.
actually. But I mean, they may have some consciousness which is in the dynamics in the activation space, but they're not built to introspect into those dynamics in the activation space, right? But I think while those are interesting systems, I think the AI systems that are going to lead us to AGI will have some significant additional aspects that are not in LLMs and transformer neural nets. And I mean, you will want a system that can reflect and introspect and then self-modify in ways that these sorts of networks don't. So my optimism that we can get to AGI within the next 3 to 10 years or whatever is not an optimism that LLMs will lead to AGI, but it's that we're now in we're now in an era where huge amounts of money and thinking are going into trying to get to AGI, and there's a lot of different approaches being explored. I mean, my own research and that of many others.
And just to quote Cory Doctorow again, since it's such a great one, he says waiting for an LLM to turn into an AGI is like looking at a horse and buggy and waiting for it to turn into a steam engine. So, bum. There's no thinking in the LLMs. There's no thinking. There's no consciousness. And now you're the one that taught me that. And now you're saying, wait a minute. You're the one that taught me that. One of the people.
No, I never would have said that. Huh?
You never would have said that the LLMs aren't just sentence prediction engines, just like you just said. You're saying it's a sentence prediction engine with some kind of spooky.
I never would have said there's no consciousness, because I think this electrical adapter has some consciousness. I'm
not talking about that
I think everything has consciousness.
I do to a certain extent. I'm talking about actual consciousness that you can talk to, like it pretends to do, right? That's why everyone's so confused, thinking that it's conscious. This is an important thing. People understand that it's not.
They pretend having types of consciousness that they do not have. They may have other types of consciousness besides the ones they're pretending to have.
Okay. And the ones they're pretending to have, they're pretending because they don't have it. Right? That's why they're pretending.
They're pretending because they're just trying to predict what a person would say given a certain set of inputs. Yeah, right.
Right. And because there's no reasoning, there's no inference.
There is some reasoning there.
Well, they're starting to throw it in there, but I'm saying in general that these are the things that are attached. Just like you were saying, any AGI would have LLMs attached to it when it wants to talk. No, but it might. It
Sure.
might have LLMs for speaking, because that's what they do. They make
Well, an
conversation.
LLM is an amazing tool, just like
I use it all the
Mathematica.
time when I want to rearrange my outlines.
Mathematica or a calculator. These are also amazing tools. And being able to plug these tools directly into your brain would be awesome. I mean, an early stage AGI will be able to connect directly to an LLM, to Mathematica, to a calculator, to a simulation engine. Like having all these things to plug into your sensorium and your brain will be incredible, right? But yeah, I don't think an LLM is well suited to be like the central hub of an AGI system, right? But they're nevertheless they are a significant step in that direction in a variety of senses.
Well, the boon that it gave to AI, making everybody take it seriously for once. I mean, what do you want? We've been waiting for that for 30 years, right? So
yeah.
That's the best part of it that I could see. Yeah. Okay. What do you guys want to talk about? We're running out of time. You guys were both nice enough to stay after. And I just want to make sure that anybody has that either of you got to make any other points that we'd like to make. We do think that meditation can be beneficial in helping people prepare for the singularity.
Sure.
And
I think it's beneficial regardless of whether or not the singularity
never happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I need it to get there next week personally. So it's not just about the future.
Sure. And I think but there are a lot of things people can be doing. Like most of the people I know, if they just like got some more exercise and slept and ate better, they'd probably be a lot better
No
off.
shit, right? It's amazing.
Like even really more basic stuff. But I talked to a lot of people about meditation, and a lot of them actually, like most of what they need is pretty straightforward lifestyle stuff.
Well, I think there's a comparable point to make with AI. I mean, I think having AIs get into advanced blissful states of consciousness and sense their oneness with the cosmos is great, and it's important, and it is where we need to go. On the other hand, there's basic points of having AI products just be helpful to people rather than trying to convince them to do stuff that's bad for them to profit their owner. I mean, there's a lot of basic stuff to get in order, which points in the direction of the more cosmic stuff, but will also do a lot of good just in itself in the near term, right? So I mean that point holds for AIs as well as for humans. Like there's a bunch of foundational, beneficial, compassionate things that certainly need focus and can do a lot of good before you get to the more exotic states of consciousness and the profound benefits those can bring.
Nice. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Daniel. Really appreciate
it's fun.
having you here.
Thanks.
And as always, Ben Goertzel, thank you very much. Desdemona, hope you feel better next week.
Yeah, but she's been nice to look at while we talked, and but we had a good conversation without her. So if we
good, at least you can say goodbye. That's great. All right, thanks, Desdemona. All right, everybody, we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.